record and we'll get started. So welcome to Dan Carey, Bill Arnott, and Alex Ganum. We're here for a fireside chat we're calling How to Succeed in Beer Without Brewing IPAs. And so we have three guests we thought would be useful informants about that. Three people who have sold a lot of beers that aren't IPAs and have successful breweries. So let me introduce everybody. Dan Carey has an illustrious brewing career with degrees from both Siebel and the Diploma Master Brewers exam at the Institute of Brewing in London. He was an engineer designing breweries for JB Northwest in Oregon in the 1980s, and as such, we claim him as an Oregonian. But more famously, he and his wife Deb founded New Glarus Brewing 30 years ago in 1993. Bill Arnott was born and raised in the UK and started brewing at Tipples Brewery in Norfolk. He followed a girlfriend to Seattle, and when he found himself missing cask ales at home, he began his own brewery in 2013. Machine House has become one of the lone producers and early evangelists of cask ale. Alex Ganum got his first taste of brewing at Ommegang before moving to Oregon, where he found a job brewing at BJ's Brew House. In 2009, he started his own brewery, Upright, which is a reference, the upright bass, to his love of music. Over the years, Upright has established itself as one of the most unusual breweries in the U.S., exploring farmhouse and wild ales, lagers, and lately cask ales. And actually, you even make some IPAs, but we won't hold that against you for this. So let's hear a little bit about, I'm going to put this on speaker. Let's hear a little bit about each of you, and we'll start out the conversation kind of getting a background in how you got into the beer styles you did. Bill, why don't we start out with you? I think you have maybe the most narrow range of beers that you produce, and you produce a style of beer that's not super popular in the United States, it's not even super well known in the United States. So why don't you tell us a little bit about cask ale and how you got into that, and we'll ask you later on how it feels brewing that, but tell us about cask ale to begin with.
Sure. So like you said, I grew up in England. I moved permanently to the US in 2010. But I spent a little time back and forth. But yeah, I'd kind of grown up with the English pub environment and cask beer being sort of always a part of that. Did a lot of my formative drinking with cask ale, which it was sort of odd at the time. Most people when they're between, probably 15 and 25 will drink more like lagers and stuff in England, and probably till 40s, honestly. But I always really liked the cask ales when I was young, and enjoyed drinking them. They were cheaper than everything else as well at the time. Yeah, just very, it was normal for that. I didn't really think too much of it. It was just, you go to the pub, you got ale, you got lager, you got cider, sort of the deal. I was drinking ales. Come to the States, I realized there was a lot of good beer here, but nothing really like that. And what was being presented as cask ale at that time seemed a little sort of misrepresentative of what makes it great. This is talking about between, 2008 and 2012, when we kind of decided to open a brewery to make cask ale. So I had worked at a brewery in the UK making cask ales and kind of had some experience doing that, and just was convinced that if we had a brewery, we could make it, something that was like the real deal, and probably better than a lot of the examples that were around at the time. So cask ale, I mean, it's, the traditional British styles where they're typically kind of lower ABV. I mean, it's a range, but a lot of them lower ABV. Session ales, often more kind of malt forward than most American craft beers. And then naturally carbonated in the casks, served at cellar temperature without extra CO2. I don't really want to get too much into trying to describe cask ale because it's really hard. You just got to drink it and try it. And, some people love it, some people hate it. But when it's not served well, it's not good. When it's served really well, can be, I don't think there's anything better. But yeah, difficult to serve in the US. As you said, not the most popular style, not the most understood. It's not easy to serve it really well. And, for us, that's been both a battle to to do it well, to educate people about what it should be like and why it's good or why you should even care. But also it's given us the recognition that we have as a brewery that, are doing something different and doing something, whether or not everybody loves it, would, trying to do it really well. And so, it served us well in a certain way.
Well, I think you have done something that it took a long time to catch on, but actually by planting a flag here in the Northwest, making cask ales, a beer style that I never thought would be popular in Oregon, it has actually started to spread. And if we can go to Alex Ganum next. Alex, you actually make cask ales now, but you didn't start out making cask ales. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the history of Upright and how you've gone through different fascinations and done different kinds of beers, and with this minor footnote about some IPAs lately, mostly you haven't really done the kind of beers that other people were doing. So talk a little bit about how Upright got going and what you wanted to brew and why you kind of shift through all these different styles.
Yeah, I think when I was getting into beer, it was shortly after moving to Portland in 2002. And I was lucky enough to get a job at Belmont Station at the time, which is a pretty good gig to get really deep into beer. Back then, I think the store boasted having 400 different bottles, which is probably a fraction of what they can say now. But at the time, that was a pretty amazing collection of packaged product. And there weren't too many local beers at the time. The local beers you would see on the shelf would be pretty straightforward. Remember, the Pelican beers were pretty popular back then in package, and but all the beers tended to be really straightforward American styles, I think. And then what really got me curious was the import section, which was really heavy on the Belgian beers. And so it was around that time that I really kind of fell in love with the farmhouse styles, or the rustic French ales, stuff like that. I thought was super tasty, super fascinating, and I just fell in love with those. So eventually, when I got to the point where I wanted to open up my own brewery, I just felt like it kind of made sense to go down that route a little bit. It seemed maybe not quite as underrepresented as what Bill dealt with cask beers around here, but still, I mean, at that time in like 08, 09, I think you could get like Ommegang and Allagash beers out here. There wasn't a lot being made locally, for sure. And even coming from other parts of the US, there wasn't a lot outside of the Ommegang and Allagash beers, if I remember right. So it just felt like a good hole to kind of fill up. And I was passionate about it too, so that always helps. So yeah, that's kind of how the brewery got started. So it began with a pretty distinct focus on the farmhouse styles, for sure. We set the whole thing up that way. If I'm not mistaken, maybe Dan, does Randy still work at New Glarus?
Oh yeah.
Oh great, yeah. So Randy was the head brewer at Ommegang when I was there in 2003, and so I learned quite a bit from him. He taught me a lot about not just the production of the beers, but I think good ways to just appreciate the beers too. And the open fermenter setup that they had at the time really appealed to me, and so we set up open fermenters at Upright, kind of based on that. So yeah, there's little roots of like Omegang and Randy, you know, in my brewery too, which is kind of fun. So, but yeah, moving forward from there, like, I mean, eventually, I set up Upright to be a pretty small brewery, and being small, I think, affords you a lot of flexibility. So we were able to stay with the farmhouse style focus, because we weren't pursuing really high volume or numbers or anything like that. But eventually, you know, like I think the popularity of those styles kind of began to wane at some point. And so you sort of naturally branch out of necessity. But I mean, there's also part of branching out that I think is built on, you just want to do different stuff. As a brewer, you don't necessarily want to do the same stuff forever. And so I think for us, producing different styles is also a way to just have fun and exercise our craft in a more broad sense. And so Upright over the years kind of widened its profile, and you know, got into lager beer a little bit. I think we started making our Pilsner in like 2013 or so, maybe 2012. I'm not great with time, but but yeah, and then we started making IPAs just like a handful of years ago. I think more like kind of typical IPAs or American IPAs, maybe not the most sort of cutting edge trendy style ones, but you can call it an IPA at least.
Yeah. And how did you get into cask? What inspired that?
Probably Bill's beers are delicious, and I got tired of having to seek them out all the time. And you know, Seattle's I like Seattle, but I don't want to drive up there too often. So his beers are great. I can't tell you how inspiring his beers were for us. It was one of those things where you drink the beers, and we'd had like cask beers before from Bridgeport when they were still open, even though they were, you know, kind of hard to come by unless you were at the brewery itself. I mean, you're not going to find like a Bridgeport cask out and about in town at the time. But going to Bridgeport, Deschutes, who is still doing cask, I actually just had a bachelor bitter last week up there, which was tasting really good. But I think it was really Bill's beers that, you know, I got to kind of consume them a little bit more regularly, and then part of that too, I think for our 10th anniversary at the brewery, I wanted to have a really sessionable beer, because the year before I'd gotten a little too drunk at our anniversary. And so I said, I'm going to make a beer kind of for me at the anniversary. And I ended up making a bitter that I think was like 3.6% or 3.7%. And this was after having been introduced to Bill's beers. And it really, I just really loved it. And people seemed to enjoy it too at that anniversary party. So then we sort of got the seed of maybe making those beers a little bit more regularly.
Nice. All right, Dan, let's hear from you. You actually started in an era when IPAs weren't actually popular. So you may not have been attracted to that for a lot of reasons, but will you tell us a little bit? You also, we talked before we hit record that I was in Wisconsin when New Glarus opened. And I know that you were making lagers. You were kind of famous when I got back to Oregon. We got Wisconsin Belgian Red and Raspberry Tart. So you were sort of famous for, I mean, famous in a a certain group for these extremely complex wild ales, maybe a decade before anybody else was doing them. So when you started New Glarus, did you have a vision of what kind of beers you would make or what kind of identity it would have? How did you get started back 30 years ago now?
Well, when my wife and I started the brewery, I had already worked in the brewing business for about 11 years, and actually had lived out in Portland. So I was there when the Widmer started and when Bridgeport started. So I drank a lot of Bridgeport IPA back in those days. And it was a great beer. So we had spent a lot of time watching breweries, which breweries had been successful and which breweries had not been, and why that had happened. I graduated from UC Davis and studied brewing, and I from San Francisco. So I grew up drinking Anchor steam beer, even when I was young. I kind of blew me away in the 70s. It was such a complex and beautiful beer. And so I've always been exposed to lots of different styles of beer. And I had done an apprenticeship at a Bavarian lager brewery near Munich. And at one point, we went on vacation to Belgium, and we went to the Lindemans brewery. I spent the day with René Lindemann and studied how to make lambic beers, how to make fruit beers. And so the idea for us starting the brewery was to make Belgian red, make our cherry beer. But also, in my heart, I'm a lager brewer. So our first beer was more or less a Helles. It was loosely designed after another beer we drank in Germany that my wife and I really loved, which was Budvar, but Czech Budweiser. So those two were our original beers. And as I said, in my heart, I'm a lager brewer. But when we started the brewery, we made these two beers, and they were moderately successful. So we followed our customers. We don't really, I make lots of beers. I make everything from lambics and sour brown ales to fruit beers. We make IPAs, we make bock beers, Doppelbocks, Hefeweiss beers. We have open fermenters, and we make all kinds of different beers. But we always just listen to what the customers want, and certainly we have zero marketing budget, and so we brewed over 200 different beers, and obviously some sell more than others. And really, for whatever reason unknown to me, it's a mystery that Spotted Cow really took off and has become the iconic Wisconsin beer. And certainly, I love IPAs. I love West Coast IPAs. And that would be our number one selling beer if that's what people were buying. But we're responding to the customers. And I'm a brewer. We make a light lager. I would be happy to make a light lager. I'd be happy to make a double IPA if that's what the customers want. So it's just simply a business and my love of brewing all kinds of beers.
Before we move on, we got to hear a little bit more about Spotted Cow. When did you first brew Spotted Cow? And it's not, there's something kind of interesting about the fact that it's not brewed to style. You didn't say this is a Pilsner or this is a whatever. It was Spotted Cow. So tell us a little bit about how Spotted Cow came about.
I was never a home brewer. I went to brewing school and started professionally brewing. So the idea of brewing to style, it just seems, on one hand, I understand, but on the other hand, it's sort of like being a musician. It's like saying, you don't sound like the Eagles, so you're not really, a rock band or whatever. I just brew whatever comes to my mind. And the idea for Spotted Cow came about when we went to visit an open air museum in Wisconsin. It was a large plot of land with homesteads on it. This group of volunteers had gone all over the state and collected these original homesteads because over the years, lots and lots of farmers have moved to Wisconsin, and these were, log cabins, things like that were falling into disrepair. They bought them, they moved them onto this piece of land, and they have working farms. So there's a Yankee farm, there's a Norwegian farm, and there's a German farm. And on the German farm, they're growing barley, and they have pigs. And in these homesteads, in these houses, there are people dressed in costume outfits, and they're cooking. Like you walk into the house and it smells like smoke and bacon. And I walked into the root cellar, and there was a crock pot with beer in it, fermented beer. And I thought to myself, boy, I wonder what German immigrants would have brewed, say, in the 1850s when they came to Wisconsin. What would the beer have been like? Well, certainly they didn't have any. This was in a root cellar, which 60 degrees. So okay, it's an ale. It's not filtered, and it's it's made with local barley. And maybe if they were an affluent farmer, they would have used Saaz hops, maybe. And I used a German ale strain, and I just made this beer as one of one of the 200 beers that we made, I didn't know whether it was going to sell 200 barrels or 2 million barrels. It wasn't even in my mind. It was just, hey, here's an idea. I want to do something historic and fun. And we called it a farmhouse ale because it came from a farmhouse. And of course, the pedantics got all wound up about that, but that's another story. And the name for Spotted Cow came about that we had won a gold medal for Belgian Red in England, and we were up in Yorkshire driving around in the springtime, and there were lambs everywhere. By the way, I love cask conditioned ale, and I drank the hell out of landlord Timothy Taylor, landlord, when I was there. But my wife kept looking out the windows. We were driving around. Man, there's just sheep everywhere. What's the deal with all these sheep? And then she stopped and she said, I bet when people come to Wisconsin, because there's lots of Friesians, lots of Holsteins in Wisconsin, she said, I wonder what people probably say the same thing when they come to Wisconsin. What's the deal with all these spotted cows? Then she got silent for a minute, a little bit of jet lag, and she said, that'd be really a good name that'd be a great name for a beer. So we took my idea for this kind of root cellar farmhouse beer and the name Spotted Cow, and it was a tough sell at first because the wholesalers were really angry because they said, come on, Deb, you want us to go out and sell a beer called Spotted Cow? I mean, beers are supposed to have names like Budweiser and Miller and Coors, hard, manly names. Spotted Cow, come on, we can't sell this beer. And so Deb, she stuck to her guns, and she said to me, well, it's either going to be a big success or it's going to be a flop. And it just kind of grew and grew and grew.
And what year was that you released it the first time?
Oh man, that was probably mid late 90s.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Maybe 95. Maybe 95.
Okay. I see people haven't asked you this. You're a historian like I am, and I think, I don't know if it was Bill or Alex who said it too. I also have a hard time with that. Ben, you often jump in here after we've gotten rolling with some questions. Would you like to throw something out?
No, I'm fascinated by these stories so far, actually. So I want to keep hearing what these guys have to say.
Okay. Well, you jump in or raise your hand or something. Let me know if you want to get in on this. So one interesting thing that I see developing is sort of we have on the one hand, Bill really pursuing a style of beer and starting with a style of beer and trying to bring customers there. Dan talking about following the customers and ending up in this place, and maybe Alex is sort of in between. So let me go to you, Alex, the in-between person, and ask, as you were trying all these different things, what was sort of the rhyme or reason? What were your ideas about what the next thing would look like? And you and I live in Portland, Oregon, so even by the time you launched your brewery, IPAs were all over the place. And I know you actually made IPAs fairly early on, but they never became a big feature of the brewery. So, how did you balance your passion for the styles of beer you wanted to do versus what the market was asking for?
Yeah, I mean, sounds like a simple question, but it's not very easy to answer because I think a lot of us can be pretty stubborn, and when you run a little brewery, you really want to hold on to that and sort of do what you want. There's a reason why you made it small, right? And so there is a bit where you think like, all right, I'm just gonna do what I want, and we'll just figure out a way to make it pencil out and make sure that the brewery is working in a way that makes sense financially. But I guess the reality is that like you do have to be a little bit more in tune with what customers want. It's a more competitive market now than when we first started. So these are things that have changed over time, I think, quite a bit, especially in the last probably 5 years or so. Because it's not just that the market's kind of crowded, but I think Yeah, consumers probably maybe like a little bit more specific about what they're looking for too. So there's a lot to that, but then there's also more consideration, I think, into how you put the beers out, not necessarily what they are. I think that, for instance, the way that we produce, like right now we have like 2 year-round IPAs, and we bang out some one-off ones occasionally too, just to mix it up. And part of the IPA thing was kind of born out of, I mean, a lot of folks that are listening that don't know, we're directly across the street from the Moda Center where the Trailblazers play. It's a big event space, and an event crowd is typically looking for more standard beers, if that makes sense. And so when we would get like the event crowd come in, and not just Blazers fans, but there'd be like all different concerts, monster truck rally, rodeo. I mean, we get a funny cross section of customers in our tasting room. They're probably not looking for like a barrel-aged farmhouse style beer. Some of them are, but the majority of them want something that says IPA. And you're able to take advantage of that a little bit because the style has name recognition. I think we can sort of brew it on our terms, which isn't necessarily probably the most popular or like trendy way to make the style now. But it's close enough to where we can label it an IPA, and it works, and people will buy it. And so in that sense, I feel like we're bridging this gap of making the customers happy, giving them what they want or what they think they want, and still, like, I think holding on to how we want to produce the beers and more sort of like in a more kind of detailed way, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Bill, you could use the cask format and do IPAs or do hoppier styles, or, you know, get into terpene infused, you know, hoppy beers that are sold on cask. But instead, it seems like you, and I know that you do some hoppy beers, but it seems like you've tried to encourage people to come to the beer rather than the other way around. And I'm curious how, as a brewer and also as a publican, I know that you, the first time I met you, you were standing behind the bar. How do you encourage people to try the beers that they're maybe not, they don't walk in thinking they want? They walk in wanting an IPA, and you want, you know, how do you coax them into drinking a dark mild?
I think it's changed, you know, and I never really, you know, I hear a lot of people, and I've heard a lot of people over the years say, you know, like, you don't get to decide what you make or sell, that the customers decide. And, you know, that there's definitely like, that's the wise way to think about it. As a really small brewer, that's sometimes hard for us to do, but I don't think I ever really came to it from the point of view of like, you know, we're going to make this thing, we're going to like shove it down people's throats, whether they like it or not, you know, because it's good, you know. But the first point is, you start, this is good. You just have the confidence that this is going to be good. And if people try it, they might like it. Accepting also that not everybody's going to like it. So, you know, sort of have to live with that one way or another. When we first started, you know, we were just trying to be a very, very small brewery. We had a tap room, and we just had 3 cask ales on a golden ale. We just called it Gold. It was bitter, mild, and gold. And this was 2013. So it was like pretty unusual. And I think that, I mean, you know, and we've never been a successful brewery, you know, from a financial point of view, put it that way. But, you know, we were able to, you know, we have, you know, outlasted a lot at this point. And, you know, I think one thing that has helped us there is that we did just kind of focus. We just focused on those, made sure they were good all the time. And actually, at least in our tap room anyway, like in our own brewery, it was like, well, this is what you got. So if we had a bunch of draft beers also available, if we had, you know, IPAs and other things that people were maybe more familiar with and, you know, used to, we wouldn't sell that much cask ale. But because we just had those, people kind of had to try them. And, you know, I'm sure there were people that just didn't come back because they didn't like them, but there was a lot that were like, well, actually, this is good. I've never tried it. You know, I thought we were going to get lots of people who like, I've been to England, I lived in England, or I'm a brewer and I love these styles. But actually, we had a lot of people who completely unfamiliar with them. We're not even trying to, you know, pressure them to like it. They just tried it and they liked it. And that was, I mean, that's always been maybe the most satisfying when you just, you know, a lot of us brewers and beer people can kind of nerd out about it. And certainly people that have lived in England or drank beer in England, you know, have that connection and familiarity. But, you know, when you can just give a 3.7% bitter or mild to a customer used to American craft beer, or even a customer that only drinks, you know, Budweiser, and they are like, oh yeah, pretty good, then that's like, that's nice, right? So ultimately, like, it's nice if you don't really have to like coax people into it too much, but you know, there is like what you're offering kind of affect that. These days we offer a lot more different stuff, and you know, of course, when our beer is sold in other pubs and supermarkets or whatever, customers are choosing from a huge array of different things, and for them to choose the cask conditioned bitter or stout, then you know, they're obviously, you know, but you know, obviously not a huge number of people are buying it, but more than probably a lot of people thought would. My hope is that it's enough to sustain a small brewery in the Northwest.
Yeah, we all hope that. For folks who are not aware, the machine house was originally located in the machine house of the old Rainier Brewery, and Bill lost the lease last year or this year sometime, and you just recently moved 2 miles west, is that right? Like across the city, and opened a new brewery. So how's that going?
Yeah, so we were in that Georgetown location. I'm sure a lot of people have been there. In the original Rainier Brewery, we lost the lease and moved out in June. Found a new location to move into, just a few miles away, and well, yeah, it's not fun moving a brewery, even a brewery like ours. You know, it's especially on relatively limited, you know, resources and manpower. But we got our tap room up and running, and we're just trying to get the brewery back, you know, up and running. Hopefully brewing next week is what we're shooting for. Yeah, and you know, tough, but you know, we're able to, you know, keep doing our thing. And it's also definitely for us a bit of a time to sort of reflect and see what we want to be doing, like, you know, what's going to give us the best chance of success. And you know, these kinds of things that we're talking about now, definitely, you know, it's a lot to think about there. And yeah, just trying to find where to sort of follow what customers want, as well as, you know, maintaining our own sort of identity as a brewery among, there's just so many breweries here, and you know, it's difficult to, you know, have a clear identity. I mean, for us, that's been maybe a little bit simpler because of the style that we choose to do, but yeah, it has to all make sense.
Right. Dan, I think we need to talk about Wisconsin. When Ben and I were talking about this to begin with, we both kind of settled on a question that I've always wanted to ask you, which is New Glarus possible anywhere but Wisconsin? I mean, everybody else in the country looks at your brewery and how much beer you sell, and the fact that you only sell it in Wisconsin, and that you don't sell any IPAs, and wonder what is happening in Wisconsin.
Well, we actually do have we have a dry hop pale ale. That's our #2 selling beer, and we actually did release an IPA, single IPA this year, and we also make once a year a double IPA, but they're not, we make, in a given year, we make 20 beers, and the top 3 are probably 85%, and all the way down to Atlantic, where we might make 40 barrels. So we make everything in between. But I would say that Wisconsin is unique. I remember I was out in Chico and I was in a taxi, and a taxi driver said, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from Wisconsin." He said, "Oh, I love the Packers. I've always loved the Packers." And I thought, "Oh, you must be from Wisconsin." No, I'm from Chico. So there is something about Wisconsin. I know that around the country, in many cities, there are expat bars where you can go into and watch the UW Badgers or the Packer games and eat bratwurst and cheese curds and all the cultural things that are about around Wisconsin. Wisconsin is it's a mix of mostly Northern Europeans, mostly Germans and Norwegians. So there's a beer culture is very strong in Wisconsin, and people are, as Deb says, parochial in their buying habits. But I would imagine that this model would work in other places. I think about beers that are iconic, like Shiner Bock is in Texas, and I would think that every area, I mean, it's changing, but most areas of the country have a culture, have touchstones, and you can't fake it. But if you're part of that fabric in a given area, I think that you can be successful. And every situation is different, and you can't copy. Brewers often copy what other people do, and I don't think that's such a great idea. Our idea for our brewery, really, we were, as I said, I'm really at heart a lager brewer, and we've always been really impressed with the Augustiner Brewery in Munich, and we think about our business lasting for hundreds and hundreds of years, and we're trying to set it up in that way. And Augustiner in Munich is kind of things wax and wane, but is sort of the beer that most people will drink, and Edelstadt. So, but Augustiner is more than the beer. It's into the culture. It's part of the fabric of the city. They have a lot of philanthropic work that they do, and we do similar types of things. So there's more to it than just a label and a brand. It's a feeling of ownership. And my wife Deb, who's the president of the brewery, is always thinking about these things, about what is it, what are people buying. Before we started the brewery, we were living in Oregon, and she attended a school called the Greenhouse Program that was put on by the state of Wisconsin to help small business people get going. It's a great program. And one thing that they always beat into the students' head was, what are you really selling? Well, I'm selling beer. No, you're not really selling beer. What are you selling? And the experience we have such an opportunity in the modern world where people are so alone and lonely and living on social media, which, for someone my age, is really strange that, to friend somebody. I mean, if you want to friend somebody, in my day, you go knock on their door and say, "Hey, let's go do something." So this modern world of social separation means that people are really hungry for something that tethers them to some type of community. And I think that is those are the things that people need to think about, rather than just it has to be in the border of my state. I guess those would be the clues that I would think. So I do think, maybe in the short answer, it certainly is possible. It's more realistic for brewers nowadays not to sell in 50 states and 8 countries. I mean, I've been in Dublin and I see American craft beer, and it blows my mind away when I see, well-known American craft beer being sold in London or in the Virgin Islands or Dublin. I think, wow, is this really what you want to do with an all malt, highly hopped beer that's not unpasteurized? I mean, I think the idea, and also the idea of salespeople, because we have a total of, I think, 6 salespeople. We have more people in our lab than we do on our sales staff. And, we're 240,000 barrels of beer. So it's not really economically efficient to sell beer a long way away, unless you're Anheuser-Busch and have, whatever, 12 breweries around the country. It's not it doesn't make business sense.
Another thing that Ben and I talked about, we're just kind of reflecting on other old breweries that we knew, and you were in Portland when Widmer opened, and Hefeweizen became their big flagship, and it was it's hard to impress on people what an important and popular beer that was in its time. And, yeah, in many ways, sort of analogous to Spotted Cow. Other breweries were imitating it. Basically, everybody felt like they had to have Hefeweizen. Yeah. But that brewery did not sustain Hefeweizen the way that you have sustained Spotted Cow. And when you talk about Augustiner or other old breweries that have been around for generations or centuries, they tend to have beers that have through lines. Timothy Taylor hasn't been making Landlord the whole time, but they've been making it a long time, right?
Yeah.
So how did you think about Spotted Cow, and how do you preserve and protect that brand, knowing that that's kind of your calling card now, and that in many ways, that's how people know you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's what I spend most of my days doing. But just a quick story about Widmer. When I was living in Portland, when they started to contract brew at the Valblatz Brewery in Milwaukee, because it was selling so well in Oregon that they started brewing it in Wisconsin. And soon after that, we moved to Wisconsin, and Frank Commande, you probably remember him, he went to the Valblatz Brewery, and they made the beer and they started to sell it. And it was great. It's great beer, but people in Wisconsin said, "Was ist das? Das ist keine Weissbier." And it didn't do well. And it dawned on me, this is important. What does well in one area is not going to do well in another. I mean, you drink a beer like Schlenkerla Route beer in Bamberg, it's freaking Nirvana. But I mean, you're drinking it in your kitchen, in Peoria, Illinois, it's kind of like, I don't know, this kind of tastes like a campfire. So every beer has a different beers fit in different situations. But to directly answer your question, when we were really tweaking this recipe, and all brewers know what I mean, to kind of fine tune this beer, I was having a hard time wrapping my head around where this beer needed to go. And Deb, having been born in Milwaukee, really understood the Wisconsin sensibility. And I did. I'm from California, from San Francisco. And so I would often say to her, "What do you want this beer to taste like? Is this what you want? No. You need to go this way." And as we fine tune the beer, now it's what we call, the beer is laminated. The recipe is done. We don't. There's really no deviations, unless there's crop changes and those sorts of things. But the beer it was a journey of really understanding what beer is. So all brewers have or should have written verbiage about what the beer is. What does it taste like? I mean above and beyond ABV and bitterness units and attenuation and color, all of those things. I'm talking about the description of what the flavor is. And that becomes your touchstone. And you want to stay within those guardrails. And so Spotted Cow is a very defined taste. And it's what I do is mainly trying to make sure that I keep the center of that lane. And that comes down mostly to choosing raw materials. For example, when we first started making Spotted Cow, it was 10% corn. And I still have some PTSD about that, because a lot of my brewer friends were like, "Oh my God, you can't use corn. That's it's not riding high school boat. And now I see these, I talk to brewers out in California, and they're talking about making IPAs with rice and corn to dilute down the fan level. And I'm like, you're freaking kidding me, because brewers gave me so much crap about using corn. And I kept saying, look, open the window in my brewery and there's corn everywhere. Anybody who's been in Wisconsin in summertime knows you can't throw a rock without hitting a cornfield. It just made perfect sense. But we went away from using corn. We went to 100% barley malt. And that meant that I had to find lower protein barley, lower protein malt. So that's another important thing in the beers. We're always looking for the lowest protein malt and the best Saaz hops, for example. And that's a lot of, the base for beer, of course, is the raw materials, and of course yeast health, which is pretty much where I spend my time.
Right.
Yep, can I chime in with a question here?
Yeah, please.
This is for all three of you guys. I'm interested, going back to kind of the basic kind of question about the way in which your brand, your brewery presents its portfolio of styles. I get the sense, of course, Alex, knowing you very well, and Bill a little bit, and Dan, reading many things you've said over the years and listening to the podcasts. All of you seem to have a sensibility that prefers beers that are a little bit more balanced. Your own preferences seem to lean that way. Beers that are complex, sessionable, moorish, etc. What's the tension there in your kind of day-to-day in terms of what you make to try and push for beers that are like that, and to get those in front of your customers? And then the secondary question that is, do you find IPA just simply too loud?
I think the IPAs that we're seeing around here now are, from my palate, definitely too loud, just to generalize them. If the beer kind of walks by a few feet away and I can smell it, that's too much, But another funny thing about that too is, I think if you were able to illustrate like the hop volume that goes into those beers to somebody who doesn't produce the beers, I wonder if some folks would look at that and be like, this is ridiculous. Like, just the sheer volume of hops that goes into some of these beers is wild. But I think if you're selling the beer on premise, you can talk to your staff, your bartenders, about how to sort of present the beer and how to I think not explain, but like kind of just almost like promote a more balanced beer, I guess. I think that's a lot easier to do under your own roof than when you're dealing with your distributors and like the other accounts like out and about. How do you really do that? I don't know if you do. You have to do it your own way with how you present, I guess, like on social media or like through your website, or just however you connect with your customers. Otherwise, that isn't in your own tap room. So that's a lot trickier, and I'm not even sure that there's a great answer for that. But for me, it's like a lot of it has to do with trying to get as much contact with the consumer in the tap room or where it's direct contact. And I remember going back to Randy again, when I was at Omegang in 2003, I think it was pretty much 100% bottles back then. And I remember talking to him and Kevin, who were, in charge at Omegang, and asking him like, what would be like your sort of dream scenario for a brewery? And they both said, a brew pub where 100% of the beer goes in kegs and gets sold in house. And at the time I was like 23 years old, and I didn't really get it, because I was like, this is so cool, look at all these bottles, they're going all over the place. But of course now it makes a lot of sense. So.
Well, Alex, it's interesting, because that was the third part of that question that I didn't want to like bomb you guys with, but is like around the hospitality piece. Is around this question of how do you actually, in a landscape where people are kind of acclimated to very loud beers, what's the secret at the hospitality, like on a day-to-day basis, to actually encouraging and getting people to take on beers that are quieter, that are more enjoyable for 3 or 4, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to embrace what the beers are, you know, that they're not loud, and that you have to just kind of remind people that they don't have to go for the big stuff, the attention grabbing stuff, high octane, super this, super that. People need to be, I think, just kind of reminded of that.
Bill, what do you think about that? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me, before you jump in, Daniel, let me, Bill, this is a problem even in the UK. So cask is sort of, you know, not doing great there either. So yeah, how do you promote these delicate balanced beers to Ben's point?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of a weird trajectory there, isn't it? Because it's like, you know, yeah, like you say, in England, cask is, you know, kind of waning. There's American influenced craft beer is a big wave that, you know, is a lot more popular. And I mean, I don't know like the statistics of what, you know, how things sell. All you hear is there's a bit of sort of doom and gloom around cask sales and pubs closing and all that stuff. But there's also this sort of resurgence of people embracing cask and younger people getting into it, which, you know, and then of course here, well, cask is not really a thing particularly, but it's really embraced by a lot of brewers, you know, I mean, with, you know, very popular among other brewers. And, you know, that's definitely a kind of interesting, maybe, development that wasn't particular. I mean, I was surprised by that, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how it is in England. I haven't spent a lot of time back there in a long time, but I imagine I mean, I see it. I see like, you know, more kind of traditional cask brewers there trying to sort of be that loud, like we can do this loud stuff, and it doesn't like look very authentic to me. And it's probably, you know, it's like cask breweries making like a IPA that's like, you know, probably just like pales in comparison to what people do here. I mean, certainly always lower alcohol in general and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can only speak to my own experience. And for us, like, we kind of just made the beers that we do that just are naturally going to be more gentle and more, you know, balanced. I mean, I feel like every brewery in the world says their beers are balanced, like no matter what they are or how unbalanced they are. So I kind of hesitate to use that term, but I think like you're looking at, you know, those more kind of old world styles that are inevitably going to be more balanced than, you know, super intense hazy IPAs, etc. And yeah, just not apologizing for it. I mean, it always makes sense to me, and we've always had loads of customers being like, well, I'm so sick of IPAs, I'm so glad you have something else. And maybe the people that just really want an IPA don't say anything. Like it just seems like the number of people given those kinds of sentiments really outweighs, you know, the opposite. Obviously statistically IPAs just keep, you know, dominating everything else in the, you know, in that kind of beer scene. But yeah, I don't know, it's never really been, not something that really bothers me that much. And yeah, sorry.
Dan, I'm sorry to cut you off. What were you going to say on this question of loud?
I think it's the wrong question, because I think of beer often like food or music. So if we use music as an example, and you might want to say, you know, something like Vivaldi is mellow and peaceful, whereas someone like Jimi Hendrix or the Allman Brothers, you know, you could crank up the volume to 10. But so different horses for different courses. So balance is. I would argue that a beer like Pliny the Younger or the Alchemist, I would say they're balanced, and the volume is certainly up, way up compared to say you know Budweiser, but they still have good drinkability, and so a beer can be loud, it can be brash, and I still appreciate it, but it has to be drinkable. And what that means is that it has a combination of complexity and boorishness, meaning that it makes you thirsty. You want to drink more. And sometimes beers can be very, very complex, but they're satiating and full. And sometimes beers can go down like water, but they have no complexity. And to me, a perfect beer is one that every time you take a sip, it's a new experience. Like, oh wow, now I'm tasting peaches. Oh, now I taste the citra hops. Or oh wow, I can get a little bit of that malty Munich character. And that's the fun part of beer. And if you tie that to a beer that has really nice drinkability, the more you drink, the thirstier you get, and then you're sad when the glass is empty. I don't care if it's 80 IBUs or 10 IBUs. That can be accomplished at 8% alcohol or 3% alcohol. So I don't that doesn't really enter my mind when I'm designing beers. I don't think about limiting and saying, and I've always had a problem with people trying to say, oh, my style of beer is better than that style of beer, or this is not real beer, or whatever, because I don't know, I just kind of find it a little bit arrogant, and not really being inclusive. And there's a lot of really great, we use the word loud beers out there that I drink the hell out of. So I don't think it's a really an important question.
So we have reached the top of the hour, and if other folks have questions, you can raise them now. I think we probably have enough to keep talking a little bit more. I have other questions, but I want to. We have a few other folks here, so if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand or holler. But we can carry on. Yeah, I mean, Dan, both you and Alex make wild ales, and Brettanomyces and bacteria can be pretty loud. So you definitely are dealing with some pretty punchy beers that way too.
Even dry hopped 8% alcohol Gouda style beers. So yeah, so marriage of an IPA and a sour blonde beer, American sour beer together. So we do push the envelope, but as I said at the beginning, it's we sell the beer, and believe me, I'd love to sell 100,000 barrels of it, but we sell 40 barrels if we're lucky. So it's what people want or don't want.
Right. Yeah, I think at some point we're gonna have a chat about Belgian styles, and I don't know if we'll include wild ales in that. They once were quite popular in craft space, and they're sort of dropping off. But that's perhaps for a different time. Ben, you should probably stop me before I ask another cask question, but I have another cask question, which is, Alex, you started making cask at a moment when Portland, we now have maybe, I don't know, 10 breweries that routinely have a cask program, and if you go to the breweries, you'll find beer on cask. Was there within beer? There's this subtle balance between what the customer wants and what the brewer offers. So there's a push and a pull. And I'm curious, as a brewer, had Bill created that pull in the marketplace, or to his point, you're one of those brewers who just love cask ale and decided you'd try to give it a push in Portland. Are you seeing, after a decade of Bill trying to evangelize these beers, are you seeing customers come in excited about cask? Is that something that we're seeing? I mean, it's never going to be a major thing, but is there a reliable market for cask ale now?
I think people are definitely people that are experiencing it for the first time. I'm surprised how much they're enjoying it. When we started doing it regularly, I thought, if this doesn't stick, I'm just ready to scrap the whole idea. And it's been received better than I would have guessed. And that's been great. I think a lot of people seem to appreciate, I think, the drinkability aspect. I mean, the styles that we tend to do, are like kind of floating in that like 4% ABV range, 3.5 to just over 4. And but obviously the beers tend to be pretty flavorful. And there definitely seems to be like a good reception to that. But I mean, if you're asking if people are coming in like looking for it, I think not as much as people that are kind of being introduced to it still.
Okay. Ben, you have a brewery. Do people come in asking for cask ale at Breakside?
No, and I think that's an interesting thing to like kind of mine here a little bit is how does each of your breweries position itself, kind of outside the mainstream of IPA by virtue of being positioned in places that are saturated with breweries. Like does Machine House do better as a English style brewery in Seattle when there's a wide range of other breweries that are producing kind of American style beers than it would, say, Bill, in Spokane?
I'm sure it's easier to sell in the Seattle market than probably a lot of others, but I don't know from experience. I think when we started Machine House and we were figuring out what we wanted to do, definitely in my mind, well, I didn't really want to start a brewery and make, anything particular or, a whole big, try and make every different style or anything like that. Gotten more curious over the years, but it was more like I certainly didn't want to they felt at the time in 2011, 2012, there was a lot of breweries in the area and there was maybe already too many, or like there was just plenty there already. So why would I make a brewery making the same stuff as everybody else? But I also had this one thing that I was missing, and I struggled to find like that an example of that. Well, for good reason. I mean, in some ways, cask ale belongs in English pubs, and that's sort of, like part of the whole experience, especially the serving method and just customer appreciation. But yeah, I certainly wouldn't have opened a brewery to make to make the more conventional styles at that time, being IPA heavy. I mean, obviously breweries here make a whole range of styles, like and we make a narrower range, but we still make a range of different things. But yeah, and there's no rules, everyone can make whatever they like, and that's great. But yeah, I wouldn't have sort of personally, I wouldn't have bothered to open a brewery unless I had this thing I really wanted to do that was not really, well represented at the time. Unless I thought I could do it better than everybody else, which I didn't.
I have a question about a future-facing question, and it looks a little different for all three of you. Maybe to start with Dan, Wisconsin is unusual in the United States in that you have all these strata of extant breweries that still exist, that have been around for several breweries dating back to the 19th century. You mentioned wanting to create a brewery that would stand the test of time and long outlast you. What does that strategy look like? How do you, as you're, you may not live forever, so what's the next generation of new Glarus owner look like, and how do you keep that going? I mean, if you go to Milwaukee right now, you see the bones of the Pabst Brewery, so they don't always last. So how do you build in that long-term appeal?
Well, Pabst lasted for a very long time, but that is a good point. And you speak to something that's sort of our mantra a lot of our success comes down to our relationship with our wholesalers, clear and concise communication with our wholesalers. And the problem with the craft brewing business is that it's limited, that the name craft beer connotes a certain type of person with a certain look, producing a certain type of beer with stainless steel unitanks. And this is what people expect. And we never thought of ourselves as a craft brewery. We thought of ourselves as a brewery. And we're no different than Coors than we are the 10-barrel tap room on the corner. We're all competing in the same market. And so when the wholesalers tried to pigeonhole us as a craft beer and all of the thing that goes on with that and the price points and the placements, et cetera, we tried to fight that and say, look, we're no different than Valblatts or Schlitz, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember when Deb told the wholesalers, we're going to pass up Stevens Point Brewery, and the wholesalers laughed. And soon after that, we did. And then she said, we're going to pass up Leinenkugels. And they thought, you guys are freaking nuts. No way. And now it's finally dawning on them that we're a brewery. We're not a cute little craft brewery. We're a brewery. And so that's number one. But as far as the long-term existence of a brewery, it comes down to the everyday decisions that you make on how you run the business on a day-to-day basis. Are you looking at this quarter and paying dividends, or are you looking at what's best for the next decade? So, for example, we're redoing our cellar with a high level of automation so we can run lights out overnight so that we don't have to have anybody on the midnight shift. It basically will go through CIP programs and get ready in the morning. So when the brewers come in at 5 in the morning, everything's clean and ready to start. It's very expensive, but it will last for 50 years or more. So a lot of it has to do with training and hiring of people. Certainly everybody knows that employee retention is changing, employee expectations. Younger people have different expectations of their work than, say, people in my generation. So the company has to keep evolving. We're now employee owned. So the employees are slowly buying the brewery from us. And we have a committee of people, and these are workers, not office staff, but brewers and maintenance techs and engineers that sit on a panel and we're slowly handing over responsibility to them as they adopt our values, the company values. The company values are all about community and the fabric of the community. It's not vampire capitalism where you're extracting, mining wealth out of the people in the community, which eventually destroys the community and ruins people's lives. If you build a business that is gives and takes from the community and gives back to the community and pay people a living wage and health insurance, et cetera, value increases and for everybody, and it is sustainable even when things are bad. When customers will stick by you in that case, and I certainly the future is unknown. Who knows what's going to happen? But that's the best plan that we can come up with.
Yeah. Alex, your brewery really reflects your personality. And I know that you're not the only brewer there, but for a brewery that is, such a personal expression of sort of the tastes of Alex Ganum and Garrett and just sort of your team, when you look forward, do you see a place in the brewing scene? And I'm mindful of especially given what's happened lately, what Dan said about the beer industry, not the craft beer industry, but the beer industry. Do you see a place for the kind of brewery that Upright is to succeed in, I don't know, the next 10, 20, 30 years?
Yeah, I think so. It's more difficult than ever, but the brewery or their business is built in kind of a really personal way, like you mentioned. And part of that, I mean, to have it be that is kind of like a luxury. It's really it's hard to explain like what that means, but to sort of enable that, having like the low volume and keeping it small, it keeps it flexible. Like there's so many sides to it. It becomes in some respects a lot more easy to keep it going because you don't have as much pressure, but it's tricky too. You don't get the same kind of momentum, when I hear, Dan talking about what he's built there in Wisconsin, it just it blows my mind. It's a lot different than what I'm doing. So again, it goes back to, I think, like embracing, what you set up, having the long-term plan is important. But also like maintaining the maximum amount of flexibility possible too.
Yeah. Bill, we'll finish up with you here. Cask Ale, you're the Pied Piper of Cask Ale. How do you see the future of cask in this market, which, as you mentioned, is getting more complex all the time? How are you feeling about things?
I'm not sure. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of room for us to keep doing what we're doing in a better way, improve what we're doing. Understanding that it's a very limited market. There's only so many places that will serve cask ale currently, or probably ever. And there's only so many people that will, drink it. It's maybe that there's, a little resurgence and then it just goes away. I mean, it feels like a thing that could just go away forever, right? In England too, and maybe it will. I suppose I don't think that far ahead, but probably should. In the meantime, I mean, we make cask ale, but we also just make beer, and we can make beer in different formats. We're obviously love cask beer and take that very seriously, but we bottle beer, we could can beer, we can keg beer. There are different ways, and if cask beer is extinct in 15 years or 20 years, then it's possible the machine house still exists, making still really good beer in a different format. Yeah. Kind of a heavy question, but it can't be like unreasonably optimistic about cask ale taking over America. I don't really think that's particularly likely. But for the meantime, it's good, get it while it lasts.
Well, I think I feel like it's going to come back, man. You've done a great job.
Jeff, could I just make a quick comment about cask beer? I really think that, Bill, I understand your skepticism, but I think you're in a really good situation, because you said at the beginning, top of the hour, that cask ale has to be made really, really well. And when it's really made well, the ratio of flavor to alcohol, to low alcohol, is sky high compared to other beers. And the complexity for a little bit of alcohol is shocking. And the generation that's coming up, the generation that has the buying power now, are in their 30s and 40s, and they're drinking hell out of IPAs, but they're getting older. They're going to get married. They're going to have kids. They're not going to drink as much IPA going into the future. And the next generation, the people who are in their teens that are coming up, are more looking at health things and NA beer. But NA beer is kind of not very sexy. But if you really want a lot of flavor, but you in England, if you want to have you can go out and you can drink all night. It's a social drink. And I think that, man, I think that maybe people in their teens, maybe they're going to take to this. I'm not saying it's going to be, a 10 million barrel entity, but for a tap room, I mean, certainly if I go to Seattle, I love IPAs, but I'm going to make a beeline for your place.
I just want to add another thing. We talked a bit about cask ale, but not really touched on just the way it's served, and is really important. It really defines if it's going to be good or not, or if you can serve it. And so that kind of just leans you more into the hospitality side. And, for us, we have a tap room, and, we want to kind of make that the home of cask beer, the place that you're going to go and get it, and it's going to be good. And it makes it a little restricting in that we can't just sell casks to anywhere around, like even the bars that are our friends in our neighborhood and stuff aren't necessarily going to serve cask ale, but it gives us the opportunity to kind of serve it the right way, sort of present the experience the way we want to, and try and have that kind of we try not to like get into a sort of gimmicky English pub thing, but like give some essence of that kind of community aspect, and that sort of an environment that's conducive to that, because there's a lot of different places that serve craft beer or whatever it is, and some of them be very odd to have cask beer in there. It's sort of like a million miles away from like an old school pub, and you can still be good that way. But yeah, I mean, I think for us, if we're going to be successful, like really doing more that way, where we get to serve it, have more of a hand in the whole experience, and it's quite unique in the beer world, in that like it's so critical to like go all the way to customer, service.
And I think I heard Dan say cask is sexy, so you should definitely jump on that as a that's pretty good.
Jeff, this whole idea of controlling the beer, I'm really jealous because we make a Pilsner, and as I said, I'm a lager brewer, and I love Pilsner, and I'm really proud of the pills that we make. Put a lot of effort into it, and I love to drink it. But if I go to a tavern somewhere and it's served to me in a shaker glass and it's rim full and poured gently, so there's no foam, because people in Wisconsin, feel like they're getting ripped off if they're not rimmed full, and so the carbonation is held in there. It's like what I want to do is get a second glass and pour it in the other glass to evolve some carbonation. So it really is hard to sell beer out into the world, even when you're trying to sell a more standard type of a beer. And so it's not just cask beer that can be problematic. And don't get me started on trying to get a highly carbonated Weiss beer on Guinness gas, which is a whole nother sin, but that's another story.
And that is a thing we should do, the sins of beer. There are many. Ben, do you have anything to add before we say thank you?
I think this has been a fascinating conversation that went where we ended up in discussing what you guys discussed was not what I expected in the least. So that makes it all the better, I think, for ourselves and hopefully for you guys and all the people who will eventually watch this. So thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much. Dan Carey of New Glarus, Bill Arnott of Machine House, and Alex Ganum of Upright. Definitely, if you're in any of those places, Wisconsin, Washington State, or Oregon, stop in and say hi and have the beer. And thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and I think people will enjoy this conversation. So thank you.
Yeah,
Cheers.
hosting, guys.
Thank you.